outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Hello, everybody, and good evening. I hope you are doing well. Thank you very much for joining us on Teachers Talk Radio for this extravaganza looking at AI into 2025 and possibly beyond, although it is quite difficult to predict anything about AI more than, say, a week in advance. We're going to have, obviously, a detailed discussion about AI today, and I've got three amazing panelists who are going to be sharing in this conversation with me. In a moment, I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you, but I'm really, really excited the conversation that we're going to have this evening. If you are joining us live and you want to join in, then of course, comment on YouTube or comment on X or comment on LinkedIn. If you've got a question, fire it in there. And we will put it up on screen, and we will we'll talk about it collectively as a group. Although I must say, I will be doing much more listening than I normally do tonight because I haven't got a clue about most of the things that are going to be talked about. But hence, my selfish motivation for doing this was to try and learn more for myself, but also to be able to share with everybody out there watching. So. Before we get into it, a special shout out to our sponsor tonight, John Catt Educational. If you are interested in professional development in any way whatsoever, then visit their website, johncattbookshop.com. They've got about 1,000 books on there for you to buy. Have we heard of John Catt? Clara, have you heard of John Catt?
I want to say that I have heard of John Carr at the...
Not John Carr, John Catt. Like cat. Not like purring.
No.
John or Mike? John Catt?
No.
They're one of the biggest. They're one of the biggest publishers of professional development books, specifically about teaching in the UK and Europe. And if you visit their website, you can get 20% off any book. I'm not telling this to you specifically. I'm saying this to our entire audience. But yeah, you can get 20% off any book on the John Catt website by using our amazing custom code, which is JCTTR2425, which I think is quite apt considering the title of the show, AI 24 into 25. So use JCTTR2425, 20% off. Right. Clara, do you want to introduce yourself first to everybody out there?
Sure, happy to do so, and thank you for having me back, Tom. This is our second time chatting, so
second interview,
so it's nice to be back. And my name is Clara Hawking, and I work as head of artificial intelligence for GlobeEducate, which is a global school group of 70 schools now. So we've grown a lot since we last spoke, Tom, and we'll just keep growing. And we have schools all over the world, and I work with safe and meaningful integration of AI into our schools, both in terms of developing teacher literacy and agency around AI, but also in order to support our students on getting an educational experience that is improved by AI and not diminished by AI. So it's a big change management to be done, but that's my primary focus at this time.
Just on your job, Clara, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of people out there interested in this job of head of AI or you know, for a school group. Was that something when you got that job? You must be one of the first in the world to get that job in certainly in Europe, I would have thought.
Yeah, I think and to some extent still I am the only one. School groups are out there looking from what I'm hearing. I'm talking to potential candidates who have been discussing how they could get on board with some of these groups. And I think schools and school groups and school districts are trying to determine whether it's better for them to have a head of AI and building internal knowledge or use external consultants. And so they've gone in a bit of different directions. But no, this job didn't exist and now 11 years ago, when I decided I wanted the job and started to prepare myself for the future of the job that I wanted. And the last few years before I got the call that the job existed were, I was getting a bit impatient with tech developers. So when ChatGPT 3 hit the market, I was thrilled because I knew now the clock was ticking. And I knew that I had the skills that would necessitate somebody calling me and saying, let's get you on board. Because it is a very unique set of skills, really, that's needed when you go in to AI in K-12 education. It's not, I am a computer scientist, but I'm also a philosopher, and I have a long background in education and teaching licenses in many countries. And that combination has really proven extremely useful in us being able to make some really strong strides in our AI integration. Really, from the time I hit the ground running and until today, where we just recently updated our AI policy again, and other schools around the world still don't even have their first AI policy. So it has been a good thing. But yes, if for those out there, listeners who are thinking about this, what I would say, it's important, of course, that you know something about technology. Computer science has been a good field for me because computer science has various systems approach to technology. It really helps you understand not just the IT architecture, but also the ecosystem of the users within the technology. And of course, it helps to understand coding and so on and so forth. But those are skills that can be taught. Having that educator background is incredibly powerful for anyone who wants to go into to start integrating AI into school. So I think that this is a pathway that's an open opportunity for thousands and thousands of people in the UK and around the world. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And our first interviewees for such role are John and Mike.
Exactly.
No, do you want to introduce yourselves, guys, as well? So everyone.
Yeah, well, as soon as we'll go the order we are on the screen. So I'm John. I've had a storied career, 26 years now in teaching. Former head of English, lead practitioner in English, and Mike and I taught together at our school in Northumberland for quite some time before I fled these sunny shores and ended up in Southeast Asia and then in the Middle East, where I led a faculty of English, but then also languages and culture. So I was leading teachers of Mandarin, Bahasa, because I was teaching out in Malaysia, and modern foreign languages. And this is where I kind of first began to encounter AI. I mean, we were both kind of like early adopters of tech in our kind of like mainstream jobs. We were part of the Google Schools initiative when it came around, which meant actually when it came to COVID, we at our school was really well prepared, wasn't it?
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, and then so from there, I kind of when I was in the Middle East, I started writing and blogging as the AI English teacher. I am a real person. I'm not an artificial intelligence, but that was just the handle that the brand I accidentally created, and it just seemed to stick. And I've been
laugh though, but there will be a time soon when you probably will be in this interview and we wouldn't know the difference. So.
Well, looking at what HeyGen have just been doing, sorry, I know, but like that, the avatars going into meetings and things, that seems to be.
Well, we'll come on to all that later, but go on, carry on the intro, because we're never going to get past the intros and into AI at this rate. Go on, Mike.
So and then I came back to the UK and landed back in our school, and we joked for a while. So we've been running something called Carpool CPD, and Mike and I shared a lift for years, and we used to just talk, and just two teachers talking.
It was about 7 weeks ago we started, and very much so like I'll just briefly introduce. I teach psychology mainly at the same school as John, and it was just literally led from there. Just having a chat on a Friday, and we release it every week, and hope it's beginning to pick up. Yeah. So we're on it.
Amazing.
And we're driving the AI kind of initiative, I think, probably in our school at the minute, along with a couple of other notable people. It's something that we're really keen to push.
That's amazing, because the reason I was sort of super keen for you two to be on this show, obviously alongside Clara, is to really talk about how you're using AI in the classroom with the children that you're teaching, on the day-to-day. I think that's a really, I mean, that's what we're about at Teachers Talk Radio, but I mean, it's really good to have that voice from there. So it's really great that you can be on the panel on this show. So let's kick off. Clara, I just want to come to you first, because I think what I want to do really is just sort of go for a bit of an overview here with you, just to start with on this, and talk to me now about what the phrase artificial intelligence means to you now. Has that definition changed in any way or evolved since you first encountered it, or is it pretty much a set definition of what it is, or do you think that it's a movable definition? Like, what is it in your view today?
It's a good question, and actually a topic of global debate, because we are now starting to see AI regulation, and in order to regulate AI, you need a definition, and so the European Union has come up with an official definition, and now other countries are debating whether this is the appropriate or accurate definition, and then similarly both the UN and by virtue of them, the work in UNESCO and UNICEF have come up with official definitions of AI. But I think for me, the definition of AI has not changed. Artificial intelligence essentially is a replication of a relatively simple form of cognitive processing that humans do. So the psychology teacher knows that we're talking about schema theory, that when we are born, we have very little information, very little concepts in our schema of understanding. But as we grow, we begin to understand things, learn things, and add that to our inventory of knowledge. So if you are 1 year old, you might look at a furry, four-legged things with a tail and say, oh, that's a cat, because you have one of those at home. And when you're 2 years old, you might toddle over and visit your neighbor, and you'll see a furry tailed, four-legged thing and go, it's a cat, because that's the data you have, that's the information you have. And the neighbor says, no, that is a dog. And suddenly your schema expands. You start to learn new things. And essentially AI was always intended to be a kind of replication of some of these cognitive process. Can we automate it, and then can we use that to do some of the cognitive processes that are difficult, and some that are even impossible for a biological brain to do. And I think in that sense, it really hasn't changed. When we have a brand new baby AI, it knows very little. It hasn't learned anything. The machine hasn't learned anything. So we have to teach it. We have to give it information, data. We have to train it about when it's right about the data and wrong about the data, and when it makes right and wrong interpretations. And the AI is only as good as the people who have trained it, what we today would call something like parents or teachers, and the knowledge that has been given, the data points that it has been given. So if it's only learned to speak English, of course, the AI can only speak English. If we ask it to speak German, it will not be able to do it because it hasn't learned the language. What we then see is that this is a type of AI that we have lived with in the classroom for more than 20 years. When Google first came in, I think Google is getting close to 21 years now in the classroom. And no one has really thought much of that AI. It made some cognitive tasks fast and simple. We could access information very quickly. What we then saw was that we started getting AI that could learn things like understanding your preferences and making recommendations based on those preferences. And suddenly your Google searches went from being kind of neutral Google searches to being Google searches that would most probably give you the answer that would be the one that you would be looking for, which then scaled to the type of AI that can make recommendations on movies that we see in television streaming, YouTube streaming, and so on, where it's getting better and better at that. And we still were sort of, I think in technology, we understood what was happening, but in schools and in general society, we weren't really educating anyone on which direction we were going. And already then, people were working on generative AI, which is a different type of AI that not only can make these predictions based on the most probable correct answer based on the data and training, but now also can generate its own content, still in that very simple model of AI. So of course it makes mistakes, and it's not a perfect technology, but we are developing new technologies very, very quickly. This is still very, very early days of more advanced forms of AI. In 5 years, we'll look back at the newest model of ChatGPT-4 and wonder why were we so amazed by that? We have moved well past it. And then we will also see some totally new concepts of how we build AI, some of these new frontier models that we're working on trying to figure out, can we build AI in a different way where we avoid some of the struggles that we have with limited data sets and biases and hallucinations in the system. So at its base, it has not changed. It hasn't changed for me either. And of course, epistemologically, there'll always be debates about how you define things and how people understand it. But essentially, it is a mechanical version of cognition in a very simple form. And because it learns so quickly and never sleeps and trains constantly, it appears very advanced now, but we are still quite a long way from having what we're really expecting to see.
Clara, that was so good. I think I'm just going to go home now, to be honest. I'm already home. I feel like if I wasn't already home, I'd be saying I'm going home now, because that was. Is that
what we're meant to do? We're just meant to go home.
We might as well, guys. We might as well pack up bags. But what I was going to ask you next, Clara, was in terms of that model then, and that sort of history that you've given us, which was brilliant, just to sort of open it up. Was OpenAI, as in like ChatGPT, probably the most, if you like, the most famous one of the lot. It was, if you like, I mean, I don't know a lot here, but would you say that ChatGPT was like the founding father, one of the founding fathers? Is that sort of how you see it? Was that the breakthrough there, or is that an engine? Is that one engine that started to do something that then everyone else has started doing? Because we'll get into this later as well, but what I was interested in is you see a lot of apps appearing, okay, particularly in education. A lot of apps appearing all the time, okay. And my question, I'll ask you all this, but particularly Clara to start with, is: are they just using the ChatGPT engine, and they're basically filtering it? They're filtering it. They're playing with it, but essentially it's ChatGPT. Because I was chatting to somebody the other week who is like who knows someone who's an AI consultant. I don't know the consultant, but they know them. And they were saying that consultant's getting a lot of stick because he's basically telling people, bin off most of the apps and learn to work with those core models.
Yeah, I'm really don't know who that is. But yeah.
No, I'm paraphrasing. The words weren't bin off all the apps, but it was certainly sort of, you can do a lot of things using the core technology was sort of the message, rather than, I need to get 25 apps now to be able to. I mean, the apps are packaging it, but I was going to ask you what does that mean? What is the truth in that?
Yeah, so I think there's two ways or two things that we need to address in the context of that, and so the first is this was ChatGPT sort of the kickoff, and they really were not. We have seen amazing advances in development of generative AI. I mean, Google DeepMind has done amazing work in terms of understanding how cognition or processing works, and in like the brain replications. The Chinese AI, some of them are amazing. And I think Kai-Fu Lee is one of the people that has really done some amazing work on a new type of way of thinking about how we train AI and on using synthetic data and a more holistic view. And so they were not first in the sense that that they were the only ones that developed and then everybody followed, but they were the first time where it was so simple for people to use that suddenly humans across the world realized there's something going on, and we should be paying attention because this appears to be a game changer. What makes it so unique, and that was the whole purpose of OpenAI's mission from the beginning, is to make it accessible to everyone. And so it makes this extremely powerful technology seem very simple to use. I can pick up my phone, I can say something to a large language model, and it can perform some kind of a task. What is missing, of course, is an understanding of exactly what happens and what are the deficits, what are the cost benefit analysis of doing this. And what we then have seen, which we unfortunately have seen before during the hype of digitalization in school, was that edtech companies were quick to just bombard schools with these amazing applications that, as you point out, and as John also said, it's just a wrapper that has been, it's an application that's been wrapped around a large language model.
I don't know if John agreed with me there. I'm intrigued because I'm going to go to John next as soon as you finish, Clara, because I saw him shake his head at one point, so I want to know.
Yeah,
nodding in agreement. It's one of the things that you do see is that I mean, I started with these, and I really do think that some of them have got some great application. They can simplify an intro into using these things, but yes, most of them are just wrappers, and they're powered by one of a number of the different large language models. The issue with making you kind of the more separation there is from this, the less you can then do with that final output. Some of them are giving more integrated chat windows. There's all kinds of things going on there, but the further away from the source you get, the more, and then sometimes an out of the box solution is what you want. But yeah, I think that's what Clara, I think that's what you were suggesting, isn't it? It's the further away you get, and then schools got bombarded with these. They were like, you go back 12 months and there was just it was almost like the .com bubble. You're seeing just these appearing and disappearing almost as quickly.
It's 100%. And I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? And John and Mike, I want to ask you sort of now, we'll get into it in the classroom now a little bit, but just leading on from that, I wondered, when was it, just briefly, that you two started using AI in your teaching?
It was probably a year ago. Like, it was actually on the basis of my brother who works in marketing, and he said he was using it, and I thought, I know I looked at it previously, but I didn't find the uses as much, and then when I started to use it, and it was using the LLMs at first, but the apps is what I particularly found. And I was trying to find something that I thought would be really, really useful. What is the one key thing that a teacher would love to have in their back pocket? And if we all were honest, it would be marking. And we said, can we please reduce our workload around marking? And that was one I was really, really engrossed by, because I thought if you can do that, you're going to convince a lot of teachers to get on board with it. And that was definitely the case. And then that's actually led me to a load of things. And as Clara's pointed out, I am convinced, as you talk about the future of where it's going to be, and you can just see actually even in the year that we've got, and even in the past month, we've seen tools that are coming out that we weren't able to use, that are so much more simple. And so it's constantly evolving, and that's the amazing thing about it.
I mean, I track back, and I think, again, I would say, like you, it was probably about a year ago that I was using it in the classroom. You kind of encountered it about 18 months ago, but it was almost like a novelty, or you were using it to just like do a little bit of ideation work or some heavy lifting on some editing. But really, the classroom, you started to see the usefulness of it about 12 months ago.
So give us from both of you then, John and Mike, give us sort of 5 ways, maybe 5's ambitious, but a few ways that you have used it in the last year, practical examples of things that you've done. Now, I'm interested as well, is the cynic in me, as I say, coming back to what we were talking about 5 minutes ago. Things that you feel have had tangible value, not things where you've gone, oh, that was fun, and then you sort of go, and then you go, oh, I'll post about that on social media because it was so fun. But then a week later, you're just back to what you were doing before because you go, actually, it's just too much hassle. I'm talking about things where you've gone, that's embedded practice. That's something I've embedded. That's something in my routine. That's something that's almost part of what I do now. So I was wondering if you could give us a few examples on that. Well,
coincidentally enough, what was our last podcast about?
It was all about why AI.
Yeah, which is a very Geordie thing to say. So to clarify for our international viewers, why I is a Geordie phrase meaning, well, yes. And we were talking about the why of AI, and it's almost the other way around. It's that we weren't thinking about what AI can we put in the classroom. We were looking at pedagogy and saying what AI can enhance here. So what you were saying?
I think the one that in terms of recently has really been used on a semi-daily basis would be a personalized tutor. And this is something that actually we've only just discovered that is called Brisk. And Brisk has put in a boost activity for the student. And you can take any Google document and it's through Google itself. It won't work anywhere else. And so you can take your PowerPoint that you've used in the lesson and from that develop a tutor that could be used. I've used it to support SEND students that may be struggling with a particular thing, to help them if they're not understanding. I was actually helping one student that struggles to type and write, but they could speak to it and it would speak back to them.
Is that devices in the classroom though, Mike?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so have you got like one-to-one notebooks or something in your classroom?
No, but we have access to a set of 60 per faculty, and that's something we're trying to push. I don't know what your schools are like, Clara, in terms of that access, but we definitely, that's what we'd love to do, is one-to-one access. It would make it a lot easier.
I have to say, as having been teaching internationally, one-to-one was just a given. It was bring your own device, or there was availability. So there is kind of like that the digital divide is really real, and it's something we need to be conscious of. I'm lucky my classroom is a computer suite because I'm a media teacher now. So that example of a sort of a personal tutor, I can see that if you have access to devices, I can see that being something that's quite easy. Because if a student has access to that and it's almost open on the desktop and it's sort of always there, that's not something you're necessarily preparing. So I guess you're preparing it initially because you're giving it, like Clara was mentioning earlier, the input. But once you've done that, it sits there and it supports in that way. So I can see the ease of that. Anything else, guys, that you think? Because that's a good one. I would say, what's the big thing that most teachers are going to be finding is challenging? It's differentiation. To produce differentiated resources, we know we would like every kid to have something individualized, but the simple leveling of a text to hit all the reading ages in your classroom, and this is almost entirely what, okay, you might not always get the same result twice with an LLM when you give it a prompt, but give it a very structured prompt, ask it to relevel it, tell it what you're doing, and it will pretty reliably produce a good, varied reading level set of text from one original source document.
Definitely.
And you can do things like keep your original source and give the varied next to it. And this is just something that I almost would say I do that on a daily basis. that idea of differentiation. And if you've got different reading levels in your class, you can do that. And actually they're now getting to the point where they can even translate. So obviously from an international classroom perspective, I had students with varied levels of access to English, and that's literally just embedded practice.
Probably said there's two more. The other big one we've talked a lot about is developing knowledge checkers, where there's a lot of just really fast pace where you can access 10 multiple choice questions or a variety of forms, and you can see really quickly where the gaps are, what they've got at the start, the end. You can come back to these questions all the time, and some of the applications out there are really good at analysing that data, and you can really target the students that are struggling, or maybe the concepts that you haven't got quite right, and then you're developing and adapting that teaching in the next lesson, and you're going to be able to do that faster, more efficiently and more effectively through these systems.
It's really good. So I mean, how in terms of and Clara, I'll ask you, is there anything from your role that anything that Michael, John haven't mentioned that teachers that you know in your group are using it for regularly?
So I think one thing is definitely administrative work. So not speaking of access, not all of our teachers have access to the same functionalities, partly because we're global. So depending on where you're actually geographically located, some large language models may have functions that work in one place but not another. So an example of that is something like AI voice, which works in our Canada schools but not in our EU schools. So we take that into account.
What is that? Sorry, what is that? Sorry, AI voice.
So the AI voice is a new functionality from OpenAI in their ChatGPT, which is a voice that not only can speak with emotion and understand emotion, but it also picks it up from the conversation that you have. So it will be able to hear if you are sounding sad or happy or sarcastic, and then it will respond to you accordingly. So it's not permitted in the EU, because that type of technology is in violation of regulation within the European Union, which I think in a way is good, because we haven't really identified the entire risk pattern for children and how this can be used by bad actors to persuade children and from something relatively innocent to buying stuff online to something much more sinister. So but it's scary,
isn't it? That's scary.
Yeah, and it's gone really, really fast. But with that being said, our many teachers have told me that they really like the administrative functions. The systems can be set to take over several tasks. I have that myself. My day starts with me going into my system and ask it to read all my emails and then organize them in order of priority and delete all the
system? Do you want to name the system?
Yeah. So I use we're a Microsoft organization, so I use Microsoft 365, and I have, so it's a special license, but there is a free version of Microsoft Copilot for teachers, and so it doesn't have as many functionalities, but it's designed to be used in a safe way within a school environment, and those are free for teachers. And so some of the things they can do is that they can ask it or set it so that it can go in and read the files. So now let's imagine that I need to make some kind of a reference to a parent with a child that has differentiation needs. And I need to sort of verify my information. I can actually ask my Copilot to go in and just go and find that folder for me, or find that file for me, and read it, and or just give me the link for it so I can click on it, so I don't have to go search through my files. So and then from there, it goes very quickly, because then I could say, okay, now write the email, which it will then do, and then I can say attach the Excel spreadsheet that I have with the overview of the learning goals for this child, and attach that to the email, go find it, attach it, and off it goes. And I think these are the functionalities that we will see more and more teachers actually embrace, because this is moving us towards AI agency or AI agents, which is sort of the next big expectation that within the next few years we will see that we'll be able to work much more seamlessly with these models, so that we can send them to work for us in many different areas.
Is that something you've come across, John and Mike? That side of things from an administrative point of view, or is that something you've sort of not done as much of?
I'm very aware of it. I know that it exists, and you certainly can use it. There are a lot of blocks on that kind of access, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I use it directly with the LLM as opposed to the efficiency that Clara has just shown us, which is the way to go about it. But writing an email is my absolute pet hate. So, like, I'm worried about it. So throwing it through an LLM is a much more efficient way of doing it.
Somebody who has, would you say though, with the writing side of things, and this applies to students as well, you know, I know someone who, you know, sort of semi-regularly sends me emails, not emails, but texts from emails that this person says, this is ChatGPT. And I look at it and I go, yeah, first read, yeah, 100%. So is there that sort of thing of, it becomes almost like a class system of writing. Okay. It's like a sort of hooty tooty thing where it's like, that's been written with ChatGPT. I can write originally. Because I mean, obviously AI is developing at such a pace that maybe you wouldn't know that in the future. But all I'm saying is right now, I think a lot of people now are clocking onto this is AI generated stuff.
Yeah, I think it's AI generated, and you can spot it if someone doesn't really know quite how to leverage the LLM. To its maximum potential, and B, they're using it as a one-stop shortcut. Click the button, give me the product. And again, that's, I think, if we go back to what Clara, you were saying at the start, when schools are being bombarded by these apps, that's what was being produced. And I think there's a big concern. This is a concern that I think I hear a lot, you know, on LinkedIn, reading a lot of the posts, spending the time as I do with my head in this in this kind of bubble. But you do hear that there's this worry that shortcutting of that skill set is leading to this kind of homogenous production of language, and words like delve and deep dive and nuance. It's taken the word nuance and broken the word nuance. It's a great word, but ChatGPT loves it so much. Everything's nuanced, and we're going to take a deep dive into things. And yeah, thanks for breaking some particularly useful words. You know, Ofsted took the word satisfactory and destroyed it as well. But you know, this is part of the problem that there is, and it's one of the tensions between the very useful qualities that it has and the kind of misuse. But that's one of the things I think as educators we need to address, and we certainly need to address it. And we've been dealing with this because we're going to be looking at AI literacy in the school. You need to address it with kids. You need to address it with the students that are in front of you as well, because they might, you know, as you said, that you lose your voice. Suddenly you become just part of this. And the probabilistic nature of the way these large language models select is they're going for that mode average, that most popular, likely response. So you get something that sounds very, well, average and ChatGPT-ish, unfortunately.
I would imagine that at some point, and Clara will probably jump in now and say, it's already happening in everything I say in this conversation, probably. But one of the things I envisage is a scenario where, let's say you're writing a blog, or you're writing a book, or you're writing a letter, or you're writing something that's not a letter, because that wouldn't necessarily be public, but some sort of public domain text, that I am almost certain that at some point there will be a certification that is probably built with AI, that you have created it without AI's help. I'm almost certain that at some point there will be something along the lines of this has been created without the help of AI to
Don't they
give
have it
it.
on Facebook? I'm sure they
Say
have
again,
that.
Mike.
I'm sure I noticed that on Facebook yesterday. There's a little
Oh,
thing.
I haven't seen it. If it was, there was literally out of Tom Rogers' head, so I can't copyright it. But it's literally me thinking about what you guys were saying in terms of that originality part, and I envisage sort of the currency of originality becoming sort of much more meaningful in future years. As in,
you wonder if that will then give more power to what we're doing right now. Actually writing becomes, obviously always going to be important, but what we're doing right now, that verbal oracy, and that's going to be absolutely massive.
Well, put it this way, podcast platforms and hosts are developing, have just started to release blog to podcast features. Now, what happens there is it takes a blog that you've written and it creates a panel discussion around the blog. And you can even use your voice because you can input your voice into it.
Ooh.
And then obviously you end up with Tom Rogers' podcast that's been sort of not created by me.
You said you didn't know anything about AI, Tom.
Well, no, I mean, these are just literally observations that I've seen that I don't actually know anything. And actually the ideas I'm sort of coming up with are just coming from the creative part of my brain with no knowledge. That's why, Clara, I don't know if what I've said about that thing with exams and stuff like that, because I'm going to throw this question to all of you as well. I'll start with Clara. I'm actually pretty pro students using AI to aid their learning. But I also am sort of thinking along those lines about that originality side of things as well. Clara,
I'm going to have to jump in now, Tom, because you sound awfully sentimental. The originality, like the good old days.
That pretty much sums me up. You haven't followed me on X, Clara. I am the traditionalist. So,
so I'll tell you what I do with the language models that I use is that I have fed them some of my own writing, some of my original writing, and I have said, remember, this is how I write, and this is the words I use, the phrasing I use, the grammar I use, and this is what I want all of the responses to sound like, because this is my tone and my preference. And then I have in my special instructions, unless it's my boss who wants me to write everything in British English and not have any contractions in my grammar. So in that case, I want every response to sound extremely British, and it works great. But the truth is that
I like overly polite then at the end of emails. It's like, I just want to check you're okay with this. Can I double check you're okay with this? Hope you're okay. It's just like,
exactly. But what has happened is, of course, it has sped up my ability to go from idea to full text incredibly quickly. So now I'm at a point where I just I speak more than I type because I feel like typing is a bit now a old school. It's so 2023, who types. And so I speak, and then the text comes up, and then from there I just work with my mouse to make the edits that I like, or maybe some adjusting prompts. And I think that is the future of writing. I think there is some conversation about whether there should be some kind of originality a statement at the end of a text. I think it is it is maybe the last sort of death prongs of a time that used to be. I think that it simply isn't something that's sustainable on the long term. On things like images, artwork, movies, and in particular digital humans, I think it's important for us to know, is this a real human being, or is this a digital human? So if I send my avatar to a meeting, I would be transparent. This is my avatar. I'm down on the beach sipping martinis.
Sorry, I've just sent my avatar to a meeting. I'm just honestly, I don't know how it all makes me feel. It's definitely send my avatar to a meeting. Just seriously, go on, Clara, carry on.
Yeah, so I did do it, which is very funny because there was a very important meeting that I absolutely didn't want to miss, but of course I took ill, couldn't attend. So I sent an avatar to the meeting, and they actually kicked me out. Like, they were so uncomfortable having my avatar there, simply just taking notes for me. So I've had it there
But
as an
when you say
assistant.
the avatar, so there was a person that was your avatar. It was it wasn't just a picture. It was a moving.
Yeah. So
person.
it's, yeah, exactly. So it's me moving, like, so it would seem as if it's me, but it really isn't me. And then what's very nice about sending an avatar to a meeting, of course, is that you can attend to other things, but at the end of the meeting, you can interact with what the avatar has observed. So you could say something like, lots of things were said. I need you to highlight the things specifically to my role and my job. What are my action points? When do we do what? Who does what when? And can you populate it straight into my calendar so that I know when I'm doing these things? I mean, you think like work that would have taken you many hours, suddenly it's simply just seconds. And what really happens is it frees me up to do other things, like some of my more creative thinking.
What is that application then? What is that?
So there's different applications you can use. So you mentioned, for example, that Hey Jen now has a new application. I think that's probably one that we will see a lot of people use, because it's either free or affordable, depending on what subscription you have. Otter AI is great, and then actually Teams has that functionality as well when you have the Copilot 365 license that you can.
Well, do they create that avatar that you're talking about?
You can make your own, and you can make yourself into whatever. You can look like a dinosaur, or I can look like me. And I actually, I did create a video with an avatar for my own children, and I sent to them, where I essentially during the video was asking them for money, and one of them texted right away, "Mom, you're such an idiot," and the other one, he said, "Well, I actually thought it was you up until, like, then there was a certain point when you asked for money, I knew that you would never ever ask me for money, so I knew it wasn't you, but it took me a while to realize." And so when it comes to originality, I think it's very important for us as human beings to distinguish when we are communicating with a human being and when we are with an avatar. But I think the blurriness is going to be so intense that it will be very hard for us to pull apart original human writing from AI assisted writing, and which I think will be the new norm. Why wouldn't we co-write with our individual AIs when we have that technology? And I think that is what we will see more and more of in the future. And then real quick, just to the point on then what are the skills that we need? And I think this is going to be good news also for our English teacher there, is that the better you can use language, the better you are at writing as a human being and understanding vocabulary and weave sentences together, the better you are as a communicator of things in any given language, the better you can communicate with your AI. So actually language literacy, foreign languages, creative thinking, debating skills, all of those skills are incredibly important. I know some people that have master's degrees in English, which used to be sort of the, you're going to live off of cold soup and dry bread for the rest of your life. But they are being hired by tech companies to help develop communication in a more natural language with these large language models, and they are making an enormous amount of money, and they're making that money because they understand language. So we absolutely still need to teach the children how to use language, but we need to recognize that their use of that language will be in relation to the technology, because the technology is not going anywhere.
No, it's interesting. Sorry if I can just jump in on that. I do think it does highlight one of the key things that I always have written about repeatedly, and I say repeatedly, though. You need that foundational skill first. You shortcutting it, just as I said before, leads to the poor results. You get that expertise, and as you say, we just need to re-examine what are those foundational skills, and communication, language, understanding these things. It's highlighting a whole new importance on these, I think.
Can I ask you one question, Clara, about teaching your students about AI? When have you done that? Have you done that? Like, what's your process of going through that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we have developed an AI literacy pathway for students from the primary years all the way up to our secondary years. And so we're ready to roll on that. But what we realized was that we really needed our teachers not just to become AI literate, but to get a sense of a feeling that they had some sense of control of how they're using technology in their classroom, and letting them get to a point where they consciously are making decisions about the technology. Is this technology teaching the student better? Because if it's not, then don't use it. And that requires some training. So our focus has been on establishing a policy so that both students, parents, guardians, and our educators knew exactly what our expectations are, what the boundaries are, and how to use it the right way. So we have an academic integrity policy as well, and then we have an overall philosophy for use of AI in all of our schools. We're warmly welcoming the use of AI technology, but it has to be used honestly and transparently. And then we are very intensely focused on supporting our teachers in learning how to leverage these technologies to help them make the right decisions. And what our students asked for a lot last year was they were interested, but they were scared of using it because they didn't want to use it the wrong way and then get in trouble. So they asked for guidelines. They really want to know exactly when can I use it and how. So similar to in mathematics, where we tell them for this assignment, you can use a calculator. It can be a graphic calculator, and you can use it for question 1 through 10. But for question 11 and 15, no calculator. You have to use your human brain because you're developing the skill, and that requires the HI, not AI. And they want the same really clear guidance for when and how they can use it. So if they're writing an essay, they want to know, can I use generative AI to work with me on developing a research question? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, how can I use it? What's appropriate? What is too much use? Can I work with it on my outline? And then again, how do I do that? And so you can see they really need a dialogue with their teachers on that. And that's been our focus, on helping our teachers have those conversations.
To play devil's advocate though, Clara, does it matter to have that? Because ultimately, when they leave school, there are going to be no limitations. So I understand the point you're making is they might be asking that. But should the answer be use whatever you want? Because that's the reality of the world that's there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. It assumes, I think, that AI gives correct answers and is flawless.
Yeah, no, I get that.
We just saw a really bad case out of Victoria in Australia, where the social services department had been using generative AI, and they had been uploading children's very, very sensitive, very, very private information into these systems. And one case was particularly grievous, and that's the one that triggered the backlash, where the father had been using the children's dolls in the progress of very bad behavior, causing the child to be removed from the family. The social worker uploads the information, has a summary written of this, then uses ChatGPT to write another document for the courts. And when the text is sent off to the court, it essentially says the father should be considered a good father because he's buying age-appropriate toys for his daughter. So, you know, the ChatGPT in this case got it really wrong. And it turns out that more than 900 people in the district had been using it to upload child-sensitive information, and as a consequence now have been banned from using it for 2 years. So that's a real-world case of like this agency is not allowed to use any type of generative AI, not just OpenAI, but any kind of generative AI, while they are learning how to work with these models safely. So I think that part of our responsibility as teachers is to teach ourselves and the students how to work with technology responsibly. And setting boundaries helps them understand that these boundaries will also be there when you go into business work. Teachers also have boundaries, right? We know that if the children are under 13, they shouldn't be on generative AI. And if they are older, we should get parental consent. And so we understand these types of things. And this will be the same for children when they go into universities and the workforce. They will have boundaries on their use.
Andy's message, I'll let you come in, John or Mike, in a second. Andy's messaged in, yes, 100% creating an ethical and responsible use of AI should be the path in education right now, because in the long term, AI will be the norm. So that's thanks for the comment on that one. I know John and Mike are absolutely chomping at the bit on there, but before they answer that, I'm just going to remind everybody of our fantastic sponsors on the show tonight that are John Catt Educational. So if you want to find out more about John Catt, you can nip along to their wonderful website. Their wonderful website, johncattbookshop.com. Get yourself 20% off the order. Use JCTTR2425. You can put as many books as you want in the basket with that. There's no limitation on the number of books. And there's plenty on AI on there, actually, if you are interested in this particular topic. And they deliver to anywhere in the world. So if you're watching this internationally, you can also cash in on the discount and grab a book from John Catt. So, bringing Mike and Clara back on screen. And John, did you want to jump in?
And I think Mike was.
It was just that it reminds me of like the social media that we've got, kind of the issues we've got right now of managing how kids use social media. And I just thought, let's just let them use it no matter what. No, of course not. We would not want that. And I think here's a chance we can get it right this time, can't we? Make sure that kids are accessing things at the appropriate age and teaching them 100% how to use that. And I definitely have seen that at the moment. Some students are using it really well. A lot of kids don't know how to communicate with it effectively at all if you don't teach them.
And a lot of kids are using it for the wrong thing.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you two, John and Mike, on that topic, actually carry on. Tell us about the way they're using it wrong and the way it's damaging sort of learning or development.
But I think the first thing, and we've conducted a survey, and I've surveyed this a couple of times in the various contexts I've been working in, is they conflate ChatGPT with a Google search. And you go, those two things are not the same. And the problem you have with the way these large language models work, and I think this is that, yes, there's a great thing about the schema and it is learning, but it doesn't understand in quite the way we understand. And it doesn't necessarily understand exactly what you're saying, and it doesn't understand what it is saying. And it can frequently, this is the idea of AI hallucination, and it doesn't know when it's outputting something that is just factually inaccurate. And I've seen students do that and get very surprised when they go, but the thing is lying to me. And I go, well, it's not. It's trying to produce accurate looking language for you. That's its primary purpose. Its primary purpose is not to be factually accurate. That's a very different kind of thing. And there is becoming an interface between these two things. But I think, again, Clara, I'd be interested to hear your perspective on it, but I think that's probably one of the biggest issues that we see is they use it like a search engine, which it's not.
Before Clara comes in, Dean, AI alone sometimes gives responses that sound good, but when researched, the responses can be flawed. Prompts need to be carefully crafted by specialists in the area. Yeah, go on, Clara.
I know exactly what Dean came in with the comment there, and I think also what Andy was saying, that ethical use of AI and AI literacy isn't just understanding how to behave when you use it. It's also how it behaves, what its limitations are, and we do have a responsibility to teach the children the difference between a Google search and using a large language model. And of course, at their foundation, they work the same. Google will never give you the accurate answer. It will give you the most probable answer based on the data that it has, that best matches your inquiry, the question that you asked it. But it never gives you correct information. That's why if I go in and I write something like beautiful body, I will see 20 pictures of female Caucasian skinny bodies. This isn't a representation of truth. It's a representation of the data that it has. So this is the most probable answer. And a large language model will do the same thing. So if you're asking it something to which it doesn't have the answer, it will try to fill it in with very pretty language because it's very good at writing, and it will appear as if it's true. But it's our responsibility as part of our work ethics to both as teachers and as students to learn how to verify these things. And as John said, and Mike as well, is that a language model is built to work with language. It wasn't built to do complicated math equations. It wasn't initially built to generate images. These are things that it is learning, but initially it was built for something else. So I think that's definitely part of it, is teaching the students and the teachers when to use what for the work. And in that sense, I do think that less is more. There are early adopters like John and Mike that will go out and work with different tools and try different things and do the exploration work. But for the vast majority of teachers, we really need the Toyota of tools. We don't need Lamborghinis. We really need a reliable tool that we know that starts, we know that it's safe, we know where the airbags are, and we know that we can put the kids in the car without everything going too fast and blowing up. And then let the early adopters and the more advanced students go in and pioneer some of the ways to do education with more advanced models. But if we're going to be successful in integrating this, we have to get the Toyotas in the.
But what drive? I think that's an amazing analogy, and just sort of processing that myself. But surely, though, that the Toyota sort of this, if you like, that is sort of safe and reliable and good in inverted commas for everybody. Is there an incentive for somebody to produce that? I guess there is, because then it would be used in education, for example. But I'm just wondering, are the plans in place for that? Is that something? Go on, John.
There are. I mean, if you look at sort of various governments around the world, and just taking the UK perspective, so the UK government has tasked a particular academy. Again, we'll try and keep things neutral, but for producing an open source model, developing languages on top of that. It's still using the LLM training data. So behind it's open source. It's open source in terms of, you can see its prompt structuring in the wrapper that it's creating. But there's starting to be moves towards these things. I saw a really interesting thing. Leon Furs is a great guy to follow on LinkedIn. Talked about putting local models onto systems, and I think that's where you're going to see things moving fairly rapidly. That means you have the content there, and you can start training it and guardrailing it. And I think trained and guardrailed systems might well be the way forward. And that's probably one way you can, as you say, create you put your airbags and your autonomous emergency braking systems in there. I think that might be the way forward. It'd be interesting to see governments producing, actually having, I can imagine a point in time where governments have public open source large language models that are hopefully ethical, hopefully, you know, free at the point of use, so you can democratize this. That would be an ideal situation. But, you know, and so there are a couple of moves there, and you might well see this, but it does require, you know, you can't just give kids ChatGPT, because that doesn't have those systems in place just yet.
I can jump into on the, you know, what would be the incentive. And I think, you know, innovation is great. It's a way to earn money. And then the better you can innovate and the first you can get to market with the coolest stuff makes them the most money. They win. And so innovation always moves much faster than regulation. But we are finally seeing some meaningful regulation in place. So the EU has put regulation in place that essentially will put an end to a lot of educational technology that are in the classroom today.
Give us an example on that, Clara, because I'm interested in that. Obviously, you know, don't get me started on the EU, and you know, sort of my you know, I have this sort of picture of the EU on my wall, and I sort of gaze at it like that every morning. Tell me
yeah,
a little bit.
So an example of that could be something like engagement tracking, where an edtech company maybe has built some kind of a learning program where part of what they have sold to the school is that they can track the students' engagement by tracking the clicks on the mouse. They can tell how long the student has been working, how intensive they've been, have they got stuck on something. Maybe the mouse wasn't working so much, so maybe that was a hard part for them. Great for the teacher to go in to do individualized working with that student. However, tracking of that kind of identifiable data is considered high risk under the EU AI Act, and it is not permitted in the classrooms. Biometric data is a complete no-go. And that includes exam proctoring software. So that was very popular during the pandemic. This is where I go in and take an online exam. My screen locks and the camera is filming my face and watching my eye movement while I'm taking my exam to proctor that I'm doing my work. Not permitted under the EU AI Act. Others are things like, for example, I'm afraid to say the name, but there are a couple of companies that are claiming that they have AI that can detect AI generated content. And these companies are trying to sell these products to schools. However, we know from the research that has been done that those AI detectors tend to pick on students who do not speak English as their first language, or students who have a very sort of short stylistic way of writing, like neurodivergent students, or some neurodivergent students. And discrimination and using AI models that have bias built into them is not permitted under the EU AI Act. So it's just a sample, but the long story made short is that every school will have to take a real close look at the AI they use, how they use it, and whether it is going to be compliant. And they have to think that into their scaling of this technology with their teachers and with their students. And that will also be the case in the UK. So the European Council has signed a treaty which then includes the UK. And as you mentioned, the Labour Party is talking about wanting regulation. In Australia, we're seeing some really good work. Leon, first that you're mentioning is part of some of this work as well, that's inspiring regulators to sort of figure out their way through it. And at the end of the day, the really big risk with AI is that schools stop using AI. We need to teach these children how to be AI literate. But if our parents panic, if our guardians panic, if our teachers panic, and everybody stops using AI, then we will have done everyone a disservice. So the incentive is really to find a balance between slowing down enough that we're not exposing children and educators to risks, but going fast enough that we are supporting the future, the adults of the future, in understanding how to get through this maze of technology that's ahead of them. It's not easy to do, but we are definitely being compelled by regulation.
Yeah, go on, John. Did you want to jump in, or Mike?
No
worries. I was going to say that I did a show a couple of weeks ago on here about mobile phone bans, and there's some schools who will looking to ban them. I mean, France, I think, has banned them completely. It's either France or Italy, one of the two. And there's been a narrative, if you like, for the last number of years around mobile phones in the classroom. Right now, I don't know where these sorts of things we're talking about, whether that, if you like, AI becomes the next mobile phones, ban AI in classroom, and good schools ban phones, good schools ban AI, right? Is that in a few years? Is that the next thing, if you like, or is that completely different? Because the reason they're banning phones is around attention and around focus and around sort of bullying and around that sort of thing. But you do sort of wonder whether, is that sort of coming down the road, that sort of backlash against a particular form of technology that everyone in the beginning goes, oh, when you think of iPads, oh, everybody get an iPad in the classroom, it's fine. And then suddenly later on, it's like, and then it was not banning iPads, but it was sort of like, iPads, so what? Or iPads, like, what a waste of money, or whatever, right? It's like, it moves down the line. All I'm sort of saying is culturally and in society terms, in Europe, for example, UK, US, Western Europe, where does it sit in that regard?
I think it'd be interesting, the banning the phone. It's an easy win, but culturally, I would say rewind. Why did it get to this point? There was no adult in the room in the first place. Why did phones become the distraction? Because it was the Wild West. It was, nobody was in there looking at what it was doing. If we just walk away from it, that's going to happen again.
I think you'd be doing a lot of students a disservice if I think about my own two who are in the education system. They're only 5 and 8, but I think Ollie's going to be there in 20 years, 26, will be 26 in 20 years, and you think he's going to be right in the center. What do I want him? I want him knowing about all this, and if you pull it back, that would be a scary thing for me, actually. And actually, if you engage with it, if you think about the skills that I've got to use in order to the analytical skills, the evaluative skills, the things that we can teach them through the use. And like you talked about, Clara, with the communication, that's such a good skill to have. So let's roll with it, let's run with it. And ultimately, you're going to be a much more advanced society if you embrace it.
I would just say, if you really want to weather vein on this, look at what Singapore's doing.
Was a good one.
Yeah.
What are they doing?
They rolled out live AI assistants in their classrooms in 2023, and they've been piloting it. They're heavily guardrailed, but we're talking about maths individual tuition assistant software that staff and students can use, and not just generative AI. You're talking about machine learning, so it can do personalized learning, adaptive learning, depending on where the students are at. But not everything in that system necessarily is something I would replicate, but you've got to have a look at, what is happening in those places that are on that cutting edge.
I mean, that personal tutor side of things, I think, is a really interesting area, isn't it? Clara, did you want to jump in on that?
I just before that, just wanted to add to with the mobile phones that it's also a bit of a 2020, back in the old days of 2023 kind of issue, because the truth is that in just a few years, it's not the phone that students will be coming in with. It will be wearable technology, so it will look kind of like this. And I cannot tell students to take their eyeglasses off, right? They have to be able to see the. And then
after that, it'll be chips that are tattooed.
Contact lenses, or
just, and actually inside their bodies. So you, unless you've got like a sensor when you walk into school, like a metal detector type thing. Oh, he's got a chip inside him, and it'll tell him all the answers. Like honestly, that's how it's going to go, isn't it?
Yeah, and that is how it's going to go. We're going to live much more closely with the technology. We're going to be wearing it, maybe have it embedded, and it is already very intimately in our homes. I have spoken to many children who have AI read them nighttime stories when mom and dad are busy with something else, or and many have an AI in their bedroom with them, so they can say, hey, turn the light on, or turn the music off. And if we don't teach a child what that means, we are really doing them a disservice. So banning is I think a bit of a waste of time. It's a distraction from the real issue. We have to learn how to teach the children how to live with technology. And I say that because we did a very poor job with social media. We've been sending kids out on the world's biggest, most dangerous playground alone for almost 2 decades. And we've seen the cost of that. And we've done that because we were the first generation of parents that were sending kids out with advanced technologies. We have to learn how to raise children with technology. And we haven't had anyone to ask for advice. I could call my grandmother for advice when my children had a diaper rash, right? But I couldn't call grandma and say, should I get a smartphone? When should they get this and this app? We are the first generation. So there's been a lot of mistakes that we've made. We've put tablets into the classroom without teaching teachers how to use these tablets. So it just became a replication for paper. But now is the time, as Mike also said, now is really the time for us to get it right. And we don't have the option of not teaching it. With that being said, I do think that we'll see a surge of analog schools, nature schools, and tech-free schools, because there is a market for all of this analog knowledge that will be lost as we move forward, will be a kind of a novel skill to have. And a few years ago now, I guess 2 years
That'll
ago,
be like, Clara, that'll be like that kid in their bedroom at the end of the night saying, Mummy, can I go to an analog school? No, you can't. I'm stopping you from doing that. I'm an AI controller. And she's like, but I want to go. Unfortunately, you can't because I'm AI controlled. And I would stop you going to analog school.
But I think that, and I think we'll also have teachers actually who will become specialists in analog learning, in those unique skills, communication, critical thinking, early childhood development, where most of the brain work really takes place. And we need teachers that understand how to raise a child in that analog environment without technology, but a child that is moving into a world strongly driven by technology. That's a whole new way of thinking about the practice, and we're going to see some amazing teacher work in the years to come. I'm sure of it.
I think it's an interesting point that you were making, and it comes down to also that almost making that decision about when do you start to introduce this, and it goes back to what you were talking about schemas. We need that schema built before we bring this in. And in some respects, I've found, I don't know what you, I mean, we've had this discussion, haven't we, in the classroom, Mike, that sometimes actually using the technology, you can then, it gives you the time and the space to step away from it as well. So it can do some of the things that you need to do very, very quickly, very efficiently. And you can spend time on that more human interaction. Having a co-pilot with your student gives you a chance to detach from your desk, get around. You're not trying to orchestrate 25 cats in one general direction. They've got their own cat herd. That's like keeping them on task, and you can go around seeing where they're at.
Yeah, I always remember a buzzword very early when I came into teaching about being a facilitator, and I always thought that was very hard to achieve. And actually, coming in and using some of the tutors, that's actually that's what I felt like I was sometimes in that lesson, being a facilitator alongside supporting those students.
But did that work, Mike?
Yeah, and I'll be honest, like being open and honest, and this is where I think doing it for the first time, being some of the first people in the schools to do it, I'm going to get it wrong sometimes. And like you said, Clara, I've got to be open and honest about this. But I can reflect, go back and say, okay, I'm going to change this. I'm going to adapt and do it better in this way.
with that example, Mike, talk me through. I want to get into the lesson with you. I want to actually think the way you're thinking in that and what you're seeing in there as the teacher, how that's looking, how that's actually working in practice.
So one of the lessons I did was within psychology. I was getting it to do. I did it in a number of ways. One was for revision purposes, and I think the first thing that I hadn't engaged with was ensuring the students knew how to interact with it as much as they needed to. So it's that literally digital literacy, and they thought that they would just be led through it, but the students needed to be able to interact in multiple different ways, because obviously they've got some students that may be working at an E and some students working at closer to an A and A star, and their actual communication needs to be different. They need to learn that. So there's that digital literacy. So it's actually me understanding that as much as they do. So that's very much what we're kind of trying to work on, is ensuring that the students have that digital literacy, how to interact with something like that. So,
but in that lesson, they've got a one-to-one device. Are they having conversations with the AI tutor while you're teaching, or is it while they're doing a task? You set them up on a task. You set them up on a task, or is it all the way through?
So the lesson that I was using it for was they've been set off with a task to revise. In particular, this was about biopsychology. So they've been pre-taught everything. So it's an opportunity. I've got it focused on 5 learning objectives. The major one is about learning key terms, testing on different aspects of biopsychology, and then even potentially asking it for exam questions and feedback. And that's where, so it can go into a number of different levels. But they needed to ask it because the tutor bot probably wasn't as effective asking it, giving feedback. So the student needed to interact and lead it a bit sometimes.
Yes.
But this is where we're at the start of it. It's going to get better as well. But the students also need to get that better literacy in terms of that communication with the AI.
But having that thing, as you were saying, though, because each of the kids was being piloted to an extent, you can then get round and see which ones are working. So it gives you more of that individual one-to-one kind of time, doesn't it? So it's an interesting, it's a lesson where kids are kind of sitting and they're all busy, but they're all actually busy. How many lessons have you seen where, it looks very ordered and everyone's doing something and nobody's learning anything? And here you can see that they're all making their own way through things at their own rate. And yes, okay, they might be struggling sometimes to ask it the questions, but that's a learning point as well.
Yeah, very much so.
Clara's interesting because Mike and John having this conversation, it's really good for me. It's 2 teachers who are in the classroom talking, debating, and I know they do that on their podcast as well, but talking about it, debating it, thinking about it, right? Is there that danger that you sort of because whenever there's something like this happens, you end up with a huge scurry of consultants. You end up with a huge scurry of money that schools think, I'm going to burn through a huge ton of cash here on AI, just because they have a panic and they go AI, and they splurge right on stuff, right? What, just talking from a sort of perspective of a school leader for a minute, who maybe hasn't thought about it too much because they're very busy people, and they're going to be presented with a lot of stuff, right? A lot of very expensive stuff in many cases. What would your advice be to school leaders when it comes to the way they should be strategically looking at this?
Yeah, and it's such a good question, and because it comes down to the 2 pain points for most schools: money and time. So one is, how will I pay for it, and 2, how will we find the time to teach my teachers how to work with this technology? And I think very importantly, now is not the time to jump in and buy all sorts of different AI stuff. Yeah. And part of that is because not just in the EU, but in other regions, regulation is coming. You have to think in change management terms. How can I put in an AI first attitude in my organization? Not just in the classroom, but in the administration offices, in the finance department, marketing, and so on. And how can I do that in a way that is safe, and then creates more excellence in the environment. And safety happens when you're using a corporate function. So, for example, we know that some teachers might have a private Google account or set up a private Microsoft account because it allows them to do something quicker, and that seems to make sense to them. But the problem, of course, with that is that you're compromising privacy and data, tracking data. If you're using your teacher account, your corporate school account, then you're inside of the framework of that account. And both Google and Microsoft certainly in those cases have large language models that are put into the system. They will not be satisfying for someone like John or someone like Mike that are early adopters and already doing a lot of experimenting. But we're also not trying to get all the Johns and Mikes into using that model. We're trying to get the 100% of the school into the same space. So whether it's Gemini or Copilot in Google for Education, Microsoft for Education, and then there will be a select group of a few people on campus that will do the experimenting, the pioneering, the piloting, because you wouldn't never want to go and buy an expensive piece of technology if you haven't first piloted how it works and how it actually improves learning, or if it improves learning. So I'm assuming that when Mike and John are using their AI assistants, they have some way of tracking the data on how is that actually improving the learning and the engagement. You can see it visually because you can see that the students are more engaged, but that's not enough, right? We want to really be able to say how they're learning better. So as a school leader, I would say, give me that data, show me how they're learning better. And then let's try it now in geography. Let's try it now in mathematics. And then if we see that this is really a product that appears to make a big difference in learning on a greater scale, then I would be maybe turning towards discussions about taking out my checkbook. But until that happens, really the best place is to try and herd everybody into Microsoft for Education Copilot and Google for Education Gemini, because it's a safe space for teachers to be and for students to be if they are logged in with their school account. So that is how I would think about it.
John and Mike, on that point of being able to do things in-house and apps and consultants and all, have you got any views on that in terms of where you see that? Because as I've mentioned, there will be, a lot of money being spent and much of it will be spent in the wrong place.
You can see it happening, and particularly a year ago, there were, and I reckon about 80% of the currently popping up platforms and things they're going to disappear. It's going to be the .com bubble. Interesting what you were saying, Clara. Both of us are doing action research. You did it last year. I led workshops with a particular platform. We did a rollout in my previous school, and I worked with the SEND department, and I worked with the primary leadership team to look at these, to see if we could, to see what the impact was in terms of engagement, moving things on. We ran a pilot looking at a language intervention, it was a reading intervention, and we used an interactive platform that actually made quite a difference between two tests. So yeah, you're right. You need to be able to say, actually, this is what we're going to do. This is what we expect to see. This is the outcomes. And we're both you're on your second round of action research with AI, aren't you?
yeah, very much so. It was really about making sure I was looking at actually marking and trying to look at the impact of that. And as you say, Clara, it's so important to make sure that you've got that knowledge. One of the things that I was talking about, that personalized tutor, you can actually see every single student, the 5 learning objectives, whether they've hit every single point, and it's that data, and like you were talking about. I can see every conversation they've had. So like you're saying, my key question that I go back to you sometimes, Dave, the big thing is, does that make a difference in the long run? You know, how much of an impact is that having on their scores and their GCSEs and their A levels? Like that's a really hard measurement in that case in point. But even if we're getting that more minute data, that's still some effective.
Again, it's just you'd have to gather different data points. There's some qualitative data about how the kids are doing.
Yeah, student voice is really important, isn't it?
And actually looking at, it's interesting. Mike Kent's another guy who his work is really interesting. He's looking at like how can you assess the interaction. So it's flipping the script on this and looking at the questions that are being asked to a live model and using that as a kind of a point of analysis. So yeah, there's lots of interesting ways, but yeah, it comes down to is it making an improvement?
Guys, we are out of time. We could have gone on ages more. I feel like we've just touched the surface on a lot of things.
We didn't. I mean, maybe we'll have through that we haven't seen yet.
Yeah, we'll have to do a part 2 at some point because we didn't really even get onto certain things I wanted to talk about. But listen, it's been fantastic. It's been a really good conversation. Where can people find you if they want to sort of follow up with any of you following this conversation in any way?
So for me, LinkedIn is the one. I'm on X as well, but LinkedIn is the one that I use the most. If I have done some writing, research, advice, or content materials for teachers, I post there often, and you're more than welcome to go in and connect with me on LinkedIn.
So I think that's where we've encountered each other a bit on LinkedIn, haven't we?
Yeah, exactly.
We'll share our carpool CPD.
Yeah.
So join us for the drive.
Yeah,
Podbean. With my calling name as well.
And your personal things as well. You're on LinkedIn, aren't you? If people want to look you up on there.
I'm on LinkedIn, and again, the blog that I write has got. I've been doing that for about a year now, and I think there's some interesting things in there. But yeah, LinkedIn, I think LinkedIn just is a really great platform for this kind of dialogue, I think.
Listen, it was absolutely fascinating. And this will be available, by the way, if anybody's just jumped on. We've just hit 1,000 live viewers. So that's great. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. And of course, for people who've posted comments, Dean, Andy, JBL. JBL's commented twice and I didn't manage to put them on screen. So JBL, I am sorry. Thank you for tuning in. But yeah, everyone out there who's watched on X or LinkedIn or anywhere else, this will be available as a podcast as well on all the usual places by tomorrow. So you'll be able to catch it there as well if you just want the audio version. But yeah, thank you very much to my panelists. Just now on the website, ttradio.org, Leanne and Ray are just starting talking about leaving teaching, ? So if you're interested in leaving teaching, go and listen to Ray and Leanne right now live on the website and have a chat with them. They're live on the website and also through the Podbean app, so you can even get involved in the conversation. And they've just kicked off that show and they will be live till 10 p.m. Thanks, everybody. And I'll be back this time next Monday night. Cheerio.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused